Samuel Gray had never bought a human being in his life. He'd told himself that every morning for 42 years, the same way a man tells himself he won't drink before noon. But the moment that auctioneer grabbed Eliza Hart by the rope around her wrists and called her damaged goods, something inside Samuel Gray cracked wide open. And before his brain could talk his hands out of it, he reached into his coat pocket, pulled out the last $50 he had on earth, and said the two words that would ruin and remake everything. "I'll take her." If this story already has your heart pounding, hit that subscribe button right now and follow Eliza and Samuel all the way to the end. And drop your city in the comments below. I want to see just how far this story travels. The Redemption Creek livestock market smelled like horse sweat and old regret, same as it always did in July. The summer heat pressed down on everything like a hand that didn't plan on letting go. Samuel Gray had driven his wagon in from the Double H Ranch before sunup, and he'd spent the better part of the morning working his way through the stalls looking for a reliable quarter horse before the season turned and the cattle drives started pulling men thin. He wasn't looking for trouble. He never was. But trouble, as it turned out, had already picked a spot and made itself comfortable. He heard the crowd before he saw it, that low, ugly rumbling of a mob that thought it was being entertained. He pushed through one shoulder at a time until he could see what had drawn them. There was a wooden platform at the far end of the market, the kind they used for selling off equipment surplus grain. Things nobody wanted anymore. And standing on it, wrists bound with rough hemp rope, was a woman. She wasn't crying. That was the first thing Samuel noticed. She was standing straight chin up, eyes fixed on some middle distance like the crowd in front of her didn't exist. Her dress was torn at one shoulder. There was a bruise along her jaw, yellowed at the edges, old enough to be healing, but recent enough to tell a story nobody had bothered to ask her permission to tell. Her hair, dark as creek water in October, had come half loose from its braid. And she was still. Completely, eerily still. The man running the platform, a thick-necked fellow named Dodd, who Samuel recognized from a bad horse trade 2 seasons ago, was working the crowd like he thought he was funny. "She don't talk," Dodd announced, grinning wide enough to show the gap in his back teeth. "Can't say if she ever did. But she can cook, she can clean, and she won't give you any back talk. Bought her off a railroad camp outside of Laredo. Papers say she's indentured, but between you and me, boys, these papers say whatever a man needs 'em to say." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Samuel's jaw tightened. "Starting bid is $40, Dodd said. "And before anybody gets soft-hearted, she ain't a charity case. She's labor. Treat her like the commodity she is." Commodity. The word landed in Samuel's chest like a stone dropped down a well. A man to Samuel's left hollered, "$42. Another man countered with 45. The woman on the platform didn't flinch at any of it. She just stood there, straight and quiet, like she was somewhere else entirely. Like her body was there, but the rest of her had already walked away. Samuel watched her. He watched the way she breathed slow and measured deliberate, the way a person breathes when they've decided panic is a luxury they can't afford. He watched her hands bound in front of her, how her fingers were relaxed, not gripping, not fighting, and he watched her eyes. That was what undid him, because for just 1 second, just one, she looked directly at him. Not at the crowd, not at Dodd, at him. And in that look was not fear, it was not a plea, it was something quieter and far more devastating than either. It was recognition. Like she'd already calculated exactly what kind of man he was and hadn't yet decided whether that was going to save her or not. "48, someone shouted. "50, Samuel said. He hadn't planned to. The word came out of him the way a reflex does before thought catches up with it. Half the crowd turned to look at him. Dodd squinted in his direction. $50 from the fellow in the back, Dodd called out. "Anybody want to go 51? Silence. Sold. For $50 to the big man who looks like he don't know what he just did." More laughter. Samuel pushed forward through the crowd, keeping his face flat and his eyes forward. He reached into his coat, counted out the bills, the same $50 he'd set aside for the horse he'd needed, and set them on the table beside the platform without a word. Dodd reached over and untied the rope from the platform post, but left Eliza's wrists still bound. He handed the loose end of the rope to Samuel. Samuel looked at it, then he looked at Dodd. "Cut it," he said. Dodd raised an eyebrow. "She's a flight risk, friend. You want her running off before you get her home?" "I said cut it." Something in Samuel's voice apparently settled the matter because Dodd pulled a knife and sliced through the rope without further argument. The hemp fell away. Eliza brought her hands down, slowly rubbed one wrist, then the other, and said nothing. Samuel stepped back and nodded toward the edge of the market. "My wagon's this way, ma'am." She followed him. Not because she had to, he realized, because she chose to, and somehow that distinction mattered more than he could explain. They made it to the wagon without speaking. Samuel helped her up onto the seat, held out his hand, and waited, not grabbing, not pulling, and after a moment, she took it. Her grip was stronger than he expected. He climbed up on the other side, unwrapped the reins, and got them moving. The road out of Redemption Creek was dry and cracked from the summer heat, and the wagon wheels kicked up a fine orange dust that coated everything. Samuel kept his eyes on the road, and his hands steady on the reins. They were a mile out before she spoke. "You paid $50 for me." Her voice, when it finally came, was low and clear. Not what he'd expected. Nothing about her had been what he expected. "I did," he said. "That was your horse money." He glanced at her sideways. "How'd you know that?" "Man doesn't come to a livestock market dressed like you driving a wagon with empty traces unless he came for a horse." She was looking straight ahead, same as she'd been on that platform. "You didn't come looking for what you got." "No, ma'am, I did not." "So what do you want with me?" The question was direct. No trembling in it, no manipulation. Just a flat, practical question from a woman who had clearly learned that not knowing the answer to that question was more dangerous than asking it straight out. Samuel thought about that for a moment. "Honest answer, I don't rightly know. I just knew I wasn't going to stand there and watch that." Men watch things like that every day. "I know it. And they sleep fine." "I know that too." She finally turned and looked at him. Really looked at him this time, not the way she'd looked at him at the market. This was slower, measuring. "You got a wife at this ranch of yours?" "No." "Other women on the property?" "No. Just me, my foreman Heck, and 2 ranch hands." "So you brought me to a ranch full of men?" The way she said it wasn't accusatory. It was just information being processed. He respected it anyway. "The foreman's got a wife in town," Samuel said. "She comes out twice a week. And I give you my word, ma'am, nobody on the Double H is going to put a hand on you. I'll make that plain to every man on the property before you step off this wagon." She was quiet a while. Then, "Words are cheap, mister." "They are," he agreed. "But I'm offering you something better than that auction block, and that's the truth of it." Another long pause. "What would you have me do?" she asked. "At this ranch." I hadn't thought that far ahead yet. She made a small sound, not quite a laugh, but something adjacent to it, like the idea of a laugh that hadn't fully committed to itself yet. "You paid $50 and hadn't thought past the buying." "That's about the size of it, yes, ma'am." "That's a fool thing to do, Mr. Gray, Samuel Gray." She seemed to consider his name like she was deciding whether to keep it or set it down. "Mr. Gray, I'm Eliza Hart." "Miss Hart." "You'd better have a plan by the time we get to wherever we're going," she said. "Because I'm not sitting on your porch like some stray you brought home." "No, ma'am, I don't expect you are." The Double H sat on the east side of a long open valley about 8 miles from Redemption Creek. The summer heat had baked the grass pale gold, and the cattle moved slow in the distance, fat and lazy with the season. Samuel pulled the wagon around to the front and climbed down, then waited. Eliza climbed down herself. He'd offered his hand. She'd ignored it. He filed that away. Hector "Heck" Ruiz came out of the barn at the sound of the wheels, a lean, brown-skinned man of about 50, with a horseman's crooked walk and a foreman's permanent squint. He stopped when he saw Eliza and gave Samuel a look that asked about 17 questions at once. "Heck," Samuel said. "This is Eliza Hart. She'll be staying on at the ranch." "Staying on?" Heck repeated. "That's right. Doing what exactly?" "We're working that out." Samuel's tone closed the subject. "Spread the word to Cole and Denny. Miss Hart is a guest here. Anything that makes her feel otherwise is a firing offense." Heck looked at Eliza. Eliza looked back at him, steady and unhurried. Something passed between them, some mutual sizing up that Samuel was not privy to, and then Heck nodded once. "Welcome to the Double H, Miss Hart," Heck said. "You look like you could use some water and something to eat." "I could," she said. "Thank you." Samuel watched Heck lead her toward the house and felt something in his chest unclench slightly. Heck wasn't a soft man, but he was a fair one. If Heck decided Eliza was worth treating decent, the other two would follow. He stood there in the yard for a minute longer, looking at the wagon traces where a horse ought to be. $50. He rubbed the back of his neck and went to see about borrowing a horse from a neighbor. That evening, Samuel sat at the kitchen table with a plate of beans and cornbread that Heck's wife Maria had left earlier in the day, and he watched Eliza move around the kitchen like she'd been there 100 times. She hadn't asked for permission. She'd simply looked at what needed doing. The fire was low, the coffee pot was dry. There were herbs hanging over the window that hadn't been sorted in weeks, and she'd started doing it. Efficiently. Quietly. "You don't have to do that," Samuel said. "I know I don't." "Then why are you—" She looked at him over her shoulder. "Because sitting still makes me anxious. And because your kitchen is a disaster." He couldn't argue with either point. "Where did you come from?" he asked. "Before the railroad camp." She set the coffee pot on the stove and took the seat across from him. She didn't hedge it or dress it up. "Tennessee. I had a husband. He died of fever 2 winters ago. After that, I had a brother-in-law who decided that made me his property. I ran. Got as far as Texas before I ran out of money and started running out of luck." She said it all flat and clean like she was reading from a ledger. "The railroad camp was supposed to be honest work. It wasn't." "I'm sorry," Samuel said. "Don't be sorry. It happened. I'm here." He looked at her across the table. In the low evening light, with the bruise on her jaw and the torn dress she'd mended at the shoulder with a piece of cord she'd found in the kitchen drawer, she looked less like a woman who'd been through ruin and more like a woman who'd survived it. Which he supposed was exactly what she was. "You got family?" he asked. "Not anymore." "Friends?" She almost smiled. "I'm sitting in a stranger's kitchen in the middle of Texas, Mr. Gray. What do you think?" "I think you're starting over," he said. She met his eyes. "Aren't you?" He looked down at his beans. "Something like that." It was Heck who brought the first trouble. Not Heck himself. Heck was as solid as good fence posts. But the next morning when Samuel came out before sunup to start the day's work, Heck was leaning against the corral fence with his arms crossed, which was what he did when something was on his mind and he was sorting out how to say it. "Out with it," Samuel said. "Cole's got a problem." "With Miss Hart." "Not with her specifically. With the situation." Heck scratched his jaw. "He's saying the men in town are going to talk. That bringing a woman home from an auction makes you look—" "Like what?" Heck chose his next word carefully. "Eccentric." Samuel almost laughed. "Cole's worried about my reputation." "Cole's worried about his own," Heck said. "He's got a girl in town he's trying to impress. Doesn't want her hearing things. Then Cole can explain to his girl whatever he needs to explain." Samuel pulled on his work gloves. "Miss Hart stays." That's what I thought you'd say. Heck unfolded his arms. There's something else. Of course there is. That man Dodd, the one who ran the auction, he's been drinking at the saloon and running his mouth about who he sold her to. Men are going to be curious. You know how it is. Samuel did know how it was. In a town like Redemption Creek, a story that started at an auction block didn't stay quiet for long, and it didn't stay accurate either. By the time it traveled through enough hands, Eliza would be whatever people needed her to be in order for their version of events to make sense. None of those versions would be flattering. Let them talk, Samuel said. Samuel, what do you want me to do? Heck, send her back. Heck was quiet. She's a person, Samuel said. She's been treated like she isn't. I'm not going to correct that by doing more of the same. He started walking toward the barn. If the men in town want to spend their summer worrying about what's going on at the Double H, that's their business. Mine is this ranch. He heard Heck fall into step behind him. You know, Heck said, Maria's going to think you're getting soft. Maria, Samuel said, is going to think it's about time. He found Eliza at the fence line before breakfast. She had a biscuit in one hand and was watching the horses in the paddock with the kind of focus that told him she wasn't just watching, she was reading them. The way their ears moved. The way one of them, a big roan gelding named Cutter, was favoring his left foreleg. He's been off for 3 days, Samuel said, coming to stand beside her. Vet says it's the summer ground. Too hard. Eliza broke off a piece of biscuit and held it out over the fence. Cutter looked at it, looked at her, then walked over slowly, still favoring that leg. He took the biscuit from her palm with a kind of delicacy that was almost comical for an animal his size. It's not the ground, she said. What is it then? She pointed. Look at how he carries the shoulder. That's old scar tissue pulling. Probably an injury that healed wrong years ago. The heat makes it worse. Samuel squinted at the horse. My vet's been treating him for 6 months. Your vet's been treating the wrong thing. There was nothing arrogant in how she said it, just fact. How do you know all that? He asked. My father was a horse doctor, back in Tennessee. She handed the rest of the biscuit over the fence to Cutter. I helped him from the time I was 6 years old. Samuel watched Cutter lip up the last of the biscuit and stand there content, like he'd found a person worth trusting. Animals in Samuel's experience were generally right about that. Could you treat him? Samuel asked. She looked at him sideways. Depends. On what? On whether you'll actually let me, or whether you'll let me try and then go do whatever you were going to do anyway. He thought about that for a moment. I'll let you, he said. She turned back to the horse. Then yes, I can help him. That afternoon, word came in from Redemption Creek with the supply wagon. Cole brought it in, a younger man, still with some of the green on him, but decent at the work. He handed Samuel a folded note without meeting his eyes. Came from Dodd, sir. Delivered to the general store with your name on it. Samuel unfolded it. The handwriting was bad, but the message was clear enough. I sold her fair. But there are men who say she was already spoken for before I got her. You might be holding property that don't belong to you. Best to come talk to me before this gets complicated. Samuel read it twice. Then he folded it up and put it in his shirt pocket. Any trouble? Cole asked. Not yet, Samuel said. But somebody's moving pieces around a board, and I don't know whose board it is yet. Cole shifted. What are you going to do? Samuel looked across the yard to where Eliza was working with Cutter at the fence line, her hands moving sure and quiet over the horse's shoulder, talking low to him, the horse dropping his head in response. First thing, Samuel said, I'm going to let that horse get well. Then I'll deal with Dodd. Cole followed his gaze. She's something else, ain't she? Watch yourself, Cole. I don't mean anything by it. Cole looked at his boots. I just mean she don't act like somebody who's been through what she's been through. "What did you expect her to act like?" Samuel asked. The younger man thought about it. "Scared, I reckon." Samuel looked at Eliza, at the straight line of her back, the steady movement of her hands, the way Cutter leaned into her touch like he'd made a decision about her. "She ain't scared," Samuel said. "She's just been a long time without somebody who treated her right. There's a difference." He folded his arms. "And I mean to make sure she knows it." Cole went back to his work without another word. And Samuel Gray stood in the July heat of the Double H Ranch with a folded threat in his shirt pocket, and a woman he'd known less than 24 hours setting a horse's shoulder to rights, like it was the easiest thing in the world, and something shifted in him. Something deep down where the hard years had packed the earth solid. Not love. Not yet. But the beginning of something that wasn't going to let go easy. The note from Dodd sat in Samuel's shirt pocket all through supper, and he didn't say a word about it. Eliza noticed anyway. She noticed the way he kept touching the left side of his chest, not like a man with heartburn, but like a man checking that something was still there. She'd learned to read men like that out of necessity, the way some women learn to read weather. You watched the small things. The small things told you everything. "Whatever's in that pocket," she said, setting down her coffee cup. "It's been talking to you all evening." Samuel looked up from his plate. "I don't know what you mean," he said. "Yes, you do." She leaned back in her chair. "I'm not asking you to show me. I'm just saying whatever it is, it's been sitting between us like a third person at this table, and I'd rather know what I'm dealing with than sit here pretending I don't see it." He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he reached into his pocket, unfolded the note, and set it flat on the table between them. She read it without touching it. Read it again. Then she looked up at him. "Men who say I was spoken for," she said. "That would be my brother-in-law. Gerald Hart. Gerald Marsh. My husband's name was Hart. Gerald's his brother." She pushed the note back across the table toward him. "He told people I was his ward. That's not a legal term for what I actually was, but it sounded better than what the truth was." Which was, her jaw tightened just slightly, property he hadn't finished using. The silence after that was the kind that didn't ask for filling. Samuel folded the note and put it back in his pocket. "He tracked you this far. Gerald Marsh has a long memory and a longer grudge," she said. "I humiliated him when I ran. A man like that doesn't let that go." She stood and began clearing the plates, not because she had to, but because she was the kind of person who needed her hands busy when her mind was running. "He's not going to come himself. He'll send someone. He always sends someone." "Dodd," Samuel said. "Probably." She set the plates in the basin. "Dodd's the kind of man who sells favors the same way he sells everything else. Whoever pays better gets the loyalty. How long do you think we have?" She turned from the basin and looked at him directly. "Not long." Samuel nodded once, slow and deliberate, the way a man nods when he's made a decision he's not going to revisit. "Then we'll be ready." She studied him. "You don't even know me." "I know enough." "You know me for one day, Mr. Gray." "I know what kind of woman stands straight on an auction block," he said. "And I know what kind of man sends a woman to one." He stood from the table. "That's enough for me." Eliza turned back to the basin, but not before he caught something move across her face, something unguarded and brief, like a window opening and shutting in the same second. He didn't call attention to it. Some things a person needed to keep private. He went to find Heck. Heck was in the barn, same as always when things needed thinking through, brushing down his own horse with long, even strokes and the expression of a man working out a problem. "Gerald Marsh," Samuel said. Heck didn't stop brushing. "Never heard of him. He's out of Tennessee. Claims some kind of guardianship over Eliza Hart. Probably has a paper to back it up whether it's legitimate or not." Samuel leaned against the stall. "He sent Dodd to sniff around." Heck, set down the brush. How long before this gets ugly? Eliza thinks it already is, and we just don't know the shape of it yet. Smart woman. Yes, she is. Samuel looked at the ceiling of the barn, at the old wood, and the swallows' nests in the rafters, and the way the last of the day's light came through the gaps. I need you to send word to Jim Carver in the morning. Heck raised an eyebrow. Jim Carver was a land attorney out of San Antonio, the kind of man you called when a situation had legal corners you couldn't see around. You think this needs Carver? I think whatever paper Gerald Marsh is holding, I want someone who can read it properly and tell me if it's worth the ink it's printed on. Samuel straightened. And I want Cole to start sleeping in the bunkhouse with a rifle close. You think they'd come onto the property? I think Dodd's the kind of man who does whatever he's paid to do, and I don't know yet what he's been paid to do. Heck was quiet for a moment. Does she know how serious this might get? She knows better than either of us, Samuel said. She's been living serious for 2 years. Chun. It was past 10 o'clock when Samuel came back through the kitchen, expecting the house to be quiet. Instead, he found Eliza at the table, working by lamplight, with a strip of leather, a needle, and a piece of cord. She was making something a wrapped brace, he realized after a moment, the kind used for a horse's leg joint. You don't have to stay up, he said. I sleep light, she said. Always have. He pulled the chair out across from her and sat. She kept working her fingers, moving fast and sure, the needle going through the leather in a smooth rhythm. What was he like? Samuel asked. Your husband. She didn't hesitate. Quiet. Good man. Worked himself to death trying to hold on to land that was never going to be enough. She pulled the cord tight and knotted it. I loved him. He loved me. It was simple, and it was real. And then it was over. I'm sorry. You said that already. I meant it both times. She looked up from the brace. What about you? You said you were starting over. He owed her that much, at least given what she'd shared. Had a wife, 8 years ago. She wasn't built for ranch life, can't hold that against her. He drummed his fingers once on the table. She left in the spring. I came home one day, and the house was just quieter. That's about all there is to say about it. That's not all there is to say about it, Eliza said quietly. He looked at his hands. No, he agreed. But it's all I generally tell. She went back to her work and didn't push further. He appreciated that more than he could put into words. They sat in the warm silence of the kitchen for a while, the lamp between them, the sound of the night outside, the needle going in and out of the leather, and it wasn't a comfortable silence exactly, but it was an honest one, the kind that didn't pretend things were simpler than they were. Get some sleep, she said finally without looking up. You've got ranch work and a legal problem and a threat from a man you've never met all starting tomorrow. You'll need to be sharp. He almost smiled. Yes, ma'am. He was at the doorway when she spoke again. Mr. Gray. He stopped. Thank you, she said, for today, for all of it. She still didn't look up from her work. I don't say that easily. I know you don't, he said. Good night, Miss Hart. Morning brought Denny Hollis to the problem, which was not an improvement. Denny was the younger of the two ranch hands, 23 years old, big as a barn door, and about as subtle. He came to Samuel right after breakfast with his hat in his hands and an expression that said he'd been talked into something by people smarter than him. Cole thinks we ought to talk about the woman, Denny said. Samuel didn't look up from the feed records he was going through. Her name is Miss Hart. Right, Miss Hart. Denny turned his hat in his hands. Cole thinks, and I ain't saying I agree, I'm just saying that having her here might bring trouble we don't need, given the way she came. Trouble came on its own, Samuel said. It didn't follow her in. But if she left, she's not leaving. Samuel set down the feed records and looked at Denny with the kind of calm that was worse than anger. Let me be plain about something, Denny. I don't make decisions about who stays on this land by committee. Miss Hart is here because I brought her here, and she'll stay as long as she chooses to stay. If Cole has a problem with that, he can bring it to me himself instead of sending you." He picked the records back up. "Now go fix the south fence line. It's been 3 weeks." Denny went. 20 minutes later, Cole Pruitt came around the corner of the barn. Cole was smarter than Denny, which made him more dangerous in an argument. He was 28, had worked the Double H for 4 years, and he'd earned enough trust that Samuel actually stopped what he was doing and gave him his full attention. "Say your piece," Samuel said. Cole crossed his arms. "Dodd's not the only one running his mouth in town. There's a man been asking questions at the saloon. Stranger. Came in 2 days ago before you even brought her back from the market. He's been asking about the Double H who works here, how many men, whether you're carrying debt." Samuel went very still. "Describe him," he said. "Tall. Thin. Got a way of talking that sounds like Tennessee or Kentucky somewhere east. Wears a suit that's too good for Redemption Creek." Cole unfolded his arms. "He's not a lawman. I know what lawmen look like. This man's working for somebody. Gerald Marsh, or someone Marsh had paid." Samuel's mind moved through it fast. The stranger had arrived 2 days ago before the auction. That meant this wasn't a reaction to Samuel buying Eliza. This had been planned before that. Someone had known she'd end up at that market. Someone had put her there deliberately knowing who would come looking. "Does Dodd know him?" Samuel asked. "That's what I came to tell you," Cole said. "Heck saw them talking this morning, behind the feed store." Samuel stood up straight. "Go get Heck," he said. They had a short, fast conversation in the barn, Samuel, Heck, and Cole, that covered the shape of what they were dealing with. Dodd hadn't just bought Eliza from a railroad camp out of opportunism. He'd been paid to acquire her and hold her until the man in the suit came to collect. The auction had been insurance, a way to hide the transaction in plain sight, or to flush out anyone who might try to interfere. Either way, Samuel had walked right into the middle of it with $50 and no information. "They'll come for her," Heck said. "Maybe not today, but soon." "They can come," Samuel said. "They won't find it easy." "Samuel," Heck's voice dropped. "This isn't a range dispute. This is somebody with legal papers, or what passes for legal papers, and a plan. You fight that the wrong way, you lose." "I know." Samuel's jaw was set hard. "That's why I need Carver here. Fast." "I'll ride to San Antonio myself," Cole said, surprising them both. Samuel looked at him. "You volunteered to fix the fence this morning." "And now I'm volunteering to ride to San Antonio," Cole said. "Whatever you think of me, Mr. Gray, I don't hand women over to men who collect them." His chin came up. "My girl in town might not understand that, but I do." Samuel nodded once. "Ride fast." He told Eliza over lunch straight and without softening it. She listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't go pale or start shaking. She just sat with her hands flat on the table and let him talk. When he finished, she said, "He sent someone before you bought me." "Yes." "So Dodd didn't take me from the railroad camp by accident?" "No." She was quiet for a long moment. "Gerald planned this. He let me run. Let me get far enough to feel safe, and then he closed the trap." "That's how it looks." Something moved behind her eyes. Not fear, not collapse. It was something harder than that. Something that had been through enough fires that it had stopped flinching at the heat. "He wants me to come back quietly," she said. "That's what the legal papers are for, to make it look legitimate so no one helps me." "He underestimated a few things," Samuel said. "Like what?" "Like the fact that you ended up at my ranch instead of wherever he planned to take you." She looked at him carefully. "You're not afraid of him." "I'm not afraid of men who hide behind lawyers and bought sheriffs," he said. "They're dangerous, but they're not brave." Something shifted in her, something that had been braced and held tight for a very long time. She looked down at her hands on the table, then back up at him. "I need you to understand something. Gerald Marsh doesn't stop. He's not going to send one man and give up if it doesn't work. He'll send more. He'll make it more expensive. He'll make it personal." "I understand." "Do you?" she said. "Because men always say they understand things like this until the cost starts being real." He leaned forward, both arms on the table. "Miss Hart, I run a cattle operation in South Texas. I've had neighbors try to take my water rights. I've had the bank try to foreclose on me twice, and I had a man pull a gun on me over a fence line disagreement 7 years ago, and I'm still here, and he's in Abilene running a dry goods store." He met her eyes and held them. "I'm not easy to wear down." Eliza Hart looked at Samuel Gray for a long, searching moment. Then she said, "I can help." "I know you can. I mean more than horses." She straightened in her chair. "Gerald's papers, whatever he's claiming, there's a counter to it. My husband's will was filed in Crittenden County, Tennessee, 3 years before he died. It named me sole heir to everything, including protection from family claims. I filed it myself. Gerald knows it exists, which is why he can't use the courts cleanly. He has to use pressure instead." Samuel stared at her. "You're a legal heir with a filed will." "Which makes his guardianship claim fraudulent," she said. "If we get a copy of that filing, Gerald Marsh has nothing but a piece of paper he paid someone to write. Carver can get that. Carver will need 2 weeks, maybe 3. She folded her hands. "Gerald's man won't wait that long." "No," Samuel agreed. "He won't." She looked out the window at the yard where Cutter was standing in the paddock, his head low and easy, resting the bad shoulder. Then she looked back at Samuel. "I'm not running again," she said. It was not a request. "Good," he said, "because the Double H doesn't run." Denny appeared in the doorway, breathless, hat in hand. His face was the color of old ash. "Mr. Gray, that stranger from town, the one in the suit, he's at the front gate." Samuel stood up slowly. Eliza stood up at the same moment right beside him, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Stay inside," he said. "No," she said. He looked at her. "He came for me," she said quietly. "I'm not going to let you stand out there alone in front of something that's about mine." He could have argued. She wouldn't have listened. And somewhere underneath the reflex to protect her, he knew she was right. This was hers to face, and standing behind a door while someone else did it would have cost her something she couldn't afford to lose. "Walk beside me," he said. "Not behind." "Wouldn't have it any other way," she said. And they walked out together into the bright, flat July heat, Samuel Gray and Eliza Hart side by side across the yard of the Double H Ranch toward the gate, where a man in a suit sat on a too-clean horse and smiled like he'd already won something. He hadn't. He just didn't know that yet. The man at the gate had the kind of smile that costs money to practice. He was sitting easy in his saddle, one hand resting on the pommel hat, tilted just enough to be deliberate about it. His suit was gray wool, too heavy for July in Texas, which told Samuel he hadn't planned to be here this long. That was useful. "Mr. Gray," the man said like they were old acquaintances. "My name is Philip Arden. I represent Gerald Marsh of Crittenden County, Tennessee, in a matter of some legal delicacy." Samuel stopped at the gate and didn't open it. "You can represent him from there." Arden smiled like that was charming. "I have papers filed under the guardianship statutes of the state of Tennessee, establishing Mr. Marsh as the lawful guardian of one Eliza Hart, formerly Eliza Marsh, by household registration." He reached into his coat and produced a folded envelope. "I'd like to deliver them personally." "Set them on the post," Samuel said. "I'll look at them when I'm ready." Arden's smile didn't waver, but something behind his eyes did. He hadn't expected that. He'd expected a rancher who would look at a legal envelope and feel the ground shift under him. He set the envelope on the post. Eliza didn't move beside Samuel, didn't speak. But he could feel her beside him the way you feel a fire not touching it, just aware of the heat. "Miss Hart," Arden said, looking past Samuel like he wasn't there. "Mr. Marsh wants you to know that there are no hard feelings. He understands you were frightened. He simply wants you home safe." Eliza's voice, when it came, was perfectly level. "The last time I was in that house, Mr. Arden, I had a split lip and a dislocated finger. Tell me more about being home safe." Arden's expression flickered. He hadn't been briefed on that detail, or if he had, he hadn't expected her to say it out loud. "That's a serious accusation." "It's not an accusation," she said. "It's a description." Samuel reached over and picked up the envelope. He didn't open it. He looked at Arden. "You'll have an answer by the end of the week, through proper legal channels." "Mr. Gray, I need to be clear. And I need you to be gone," Samuel said. "You've delivered your papers. We're done for today." Arden held his position a moment longer, the kind of pause a man uses when he wants you to understand he's choosing to leave, not being made to. Then he tipped his hat, turned his horse, and rode back up the road toward town. Samuel stood there until the sound of hooves faded out completely. Then he looked at Eliza. Dislocated finger. "Among other things," she said flatly. "I didn't tell you everything." "No," he said. "I didn't figure you had." She looked at the envelope in his hand. "How bad is it?" He opened it and read it standing there in the gate. It took him 2 passes to get through the legal language, and even then he only caught about half of what it was trying to do. But the shape of it was clear enough. The paper claimed Eliza had entered Gerald Marsh's household as a dependent following her husband's death, that she had abandoned her legal obligations under that arrangement, and that Marsh was entitled under Tennessee guardianship law to petition for her return, and the settlement of debts she allegedly owed the estate. "Debts," Samuel said. "He'll say I stole from him when I left," Eliza said. "Money, property, whatever he can make stick." "Did you—" She looked at him. "I took the clothes on my back," she said. "And my husband's pocket watch, which was mine by the will." A beat. "And $20 from the kitchen jar that Gerald owed my husband for 2 years of shared labor before he died. I counted it out to the penny." Samuel folded the paper back up. "Carver will eat this for breakfast." "Carver's not here yet," she said. And that was the problem. John. By evening, the problem had grown legs. Heck came in from town with Maria. His wife and Maria had the expression of a woman who'd heard something at the market that she hadn't wanted to hear. She sat down at the kitchen table with Eliza and Samuel and didn't waste time getting to it. "Dodd's been talking to people," she said. "Not just about the auction. He's saying things that she put a hex on your horses, that the roan gelding wouldn't let anyone near him before, and now he follows her around like a dog." She folded her hands. "You know how people are. One foolish story, and it finds the people who want to believe it." "That's ridiculous," Samuel said. "Of course it's ridiculous," Maria said sharply. "But ridiculous things have hurt women before." Eliza was looking at the table. "He's doing it on purpose," she said quietly. "Gerald, this is what he does. He doesn't attack directly. He poisons the ground first." She looked up. "If the town turns against me, you can't protect me. Not without it costing you everything." "Let me worry about what it costs," Samuel said. "I'm asking you not to be noble for 1 minute and think practically," she said. "If the people in Redemption Creek decide I'm trouble, Arden doesn't need a judge. He just needs a sheriff who wants to be popular." The room went quiet. It was Heck who said it. "Sheriff Cade's up for re-election in the fall." Nobody needed to add anything to that. Samuel stood up. "Then we move faster than they do." He looked at Maria. "Can you stay tonight? I don't want Eliza alone in the house if anyone decides to come calling after dark." Maria looked at Eliza. Something passed between them, woman to woman, the kind of look that doesn't need words because the words would take too long, and both of them knew the story already. "I'm staying," Maria said simply. Samuel found Heck outside, and they stood together in the dark for a minute without talking. "You know what this is starting to look like," Heck said. "Tell me anyway." "It's starting to look like a man who's built something worth taking, and the people who want to take it have figured out that the fastest way in is through her." Heck looked at him sideways. "You're not just protecting a woman you bought at an auction anymore." "No," Samuel said. "I'm not." "When did that change?" Samuel thought about it honestly. "When she told me where Cutter's pain was coming from," he said. "Somewhere around then." Heck made a sound in his throat that might have been a laugh. 3 days. 2.5. "Lord," Heck said. And then seriously, "Be careful, Samuel, not with her, with yourself. You do everything right, and this still might go sideways." "I know it." "And you're doing it anyway." "Yes." Heck nodded. "All right, then we do it right." The next morning was when the town made its move. It came in the form of 3 men on horseback, not Arden, not Dodd, but men Samuel half recognized from the market and from the church social 2 summers back. Ordinary men, which somehow made it worse. Ordinary men worked up into doing extraordinary things by a story someone else had told them. Their leader, a farmer named Wick Pierce, who Samuel had bought fence posts from twice, stopped his horse at the gate and called out, "Gray, we need to talk to you about the woman." Samuel came out of the barn alone. He didn't call for Heck, didn't call for Cole. He walked to the gate and put his hands on the top rail and looked at them. "Morning, Wick," he said. "Morning." Pierce at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. "Look, we're not here to make trouble. But there's talk some of the families are concerned. About what's being said." "About Miss Hart," Samuel said. "About what she is." Pierce shifted in his saddle. "Sam, you're a reasonable man. You know we got children in this town. If she's doing something with those horses—" "She's treating a horse's shoulder injury," Samuel said, "with techniques her father taught her. He was a veterinarian." "That's what you say." "That's what's true." Samuel kept his voice flat and even. "Wick, you bought fence posts from me for 4 years. You know what kind of man I am. I'm telling you, this woman is here because she needed help. She's got skills this ranch can use, and everything else you've heard is a story being paid for by a man in Tennessee who wants her back so he can hurt her again." He looked at all 3 of them in turn. "You want to be part of that story." Pierce's jaw worked. "The saloon's been—" "I don't care what the saloon's been," Samuel said. "I care what you decide right now standing here." The second man, younger someone Samuel didn't know well, leaned over and said something quiet to Pierce. Pierce listened, then looked back at Samuel. "Dodd says she bewitched you," Pierce said. It came out sounding like even he knew how foolish it was. "Dodd sold a woman off an auction block," Samuel said. "His opinion on what's natural and what isn't doesn't carry a lot of weight with me." Pierce sat there a long moment. Behind Samuel, he heard the front door of the house open and close. He didn't turn around. But he knew. Eliza walked up beside him, stopped, and looked at the 3 men on the road. The younger man's horse shied sideways, just nerves, just an animal reacting to something, but all 3 men stiffened like it meant something. Eliza looked at them calmly. "My name is Eliza Hart," she said. "I grew up in Crittenden County, Tennessee. My father was a horse doctor. My husband was a farmer. I can make biscuits, I can set a bone, and I can tell you what's wrong with your animals if you give me 5 minutes with them." She paused. "I am not a witch. I am a woman who has had a very hard 2 years and would like very much to be left alone to do useful work." She looked directly at Pierce. "If your children are sick or your animals are ailing, I will help you. That's all I have to offer. Make of it what you will." The silence after that was the kind that tilts things. Pierce looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Samuel. Then he looked at his hands on his reins. "I got a mare," he said slowly. "Been off her feed for 3 weeks. Vet says he can't find the cause." "Bring her by," Eliza said. "I'll look at her." Pierce turned his horse without another word and rode back up the road. The other two followed. Not convinced, maybe, but no longer a mob. Samuel let out a breath. "That was a risk," he said quietly. "Everything's a risk," she said. "Standing still is a risk." The twist came that same afternoon, and it came from the last place Samuel expected. Maria found it. She'd been going through the kitchen reorganizing, which she did when she was anxious, and she'd found, tucked behind the flour sack pushed back against the wall, like someone had hidden it in a hurry, a small leather satchel. Inside the satchel was a folded document, a handful of coin, and a note written in a hand Eliza recognized before she'd finished reading the first line. Gerald Marsh's hand. She stood in the kitchen and held the document and didn't say anything for a moment, and Maria watched her face go through something that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite anger, something more like the feeling of stepping on ice and knowing it was going to crack. "How did this get here?" Samuel asked. "Someone put it here before I arrived," Eliza said. "Before you even bought me. This was placed here in your house before any of this started." She set the document on the table. It was a bill of sale. A bill of sale that listed Eliza Hart as collateral on a debt supposedly owed by her late husband to Gerald Marsh, and that transferred said collateral to whichever buyer acquired her at auction. The buyer's name had been left blank. It was designed to be filled in after the fact, after Samuel's name was known. The language was careful, legal-sounding, written to confuse rather than clarify the way those documents always were. But the intent was plain as daylight. Whoever bought Eliza at that auction was now legally entangled in a debt claim, and Gerald Marsh's attorney could use that to compel Samuel to either pay the alleged debt or surrender her. It was a trap. And Samuel had walked into it with both feet. "He planted this here," Samuel said. "Someone did," Eliza said. "Dodd has access to town. If he knew you'd be at the market and they were watching the market, he could have had someone come out here while you were gone and put this where it would be found. Or not found until the right moment," Heck said from the doorway. "He'd come in quiet. When Arden comes back with the sheriff." Samuel picked up the document and looked at it carefully. He was not a legal man. He knew cattle and land and weather and work, but he knew enough to see the seams where the language didn't quite fit together. He'd seen forged land deeds twice in his life. This had the same quality, convincing at a glance, weaker the longer you looked. "Carver," Samuel said. "2 days away at least," Heck said. "Can we hold 2 days? Depends on what Arden does next." Eliza sat down at the table. She was thinking he could see it in the way she held herself, the deliberate stillness, like she was organizing something inside her own mind that needed careful handling. "The debt claim is in my husband's name," she said. Thomas Hart. But Thomas Hart's estate was settled by the will. Every debt he had was discharged by the county court 2 years ago. She looked up. "I have the discharge papers." "Where?" Samuel asked. "Sewn into the lining of my boot," she said. "I've carried them since the day I left." Every person in that kitchen stared at her. She reached down, unlaced her left boot, and worked at the inner lining with her fingernail until a folded piece of paper came loose, worn soft with carrying, but intact. She set it on the table next to Gerald Marsh's forged bill of sale. "He knew about these," she said. "That's why he couldn't use the courts directly. The will and the discharge papers make his claim worthless." She looked at the 2 documents side by side. "But he thought he'd gotten rid of them when he went through my husband's things after the funeral. He didn't know I'd already made copies and filed one with the county clerk." "And the other copy?" Samuel asked. She tapped her boot on the floor. "Right here." Heck started to laugh, a genuine startled laugh, the kind that comes out of a man before he can decide whether it's appropriate. He cut it off. "Sorry," he said. It's just he spent all this time and money and planning, and she had the whole thing in her boot. Men like Gerald always assume women aren't paying attention, Eliza said. There was no satisfaction in her voice, just fact. My husband taught me to pay attention. Samuel looked at her. Really looked at her the way a man looks at something he's still trying to fully see. 2 days. She'd been at the Double H 2 days. And in 2 days, she'd diagnosed Cutter's injury, correctly turned a potential mob with plain speech, and was now sitting at his kitchen table holding the legal key that dismantled a 2-year conspiracy from inside her boot. When Carver gets here, Samuel said, we give him both documents, the forged bill of sale and the discharge papers. He files an injunction against Arden's claim and forwards the fraud complaint to the Federal Land Office. That could take weeks, Eliza said. It could. And Arden will be back before then. Yes. She looked at him across the table. So, what do we do when he comes? Samuel set both documents carefully in the center of the table, one on top of the other, her paper on top of Marsh's. We stand there and we don't move, he said. And we let him figure out he's already lost. He just doesn't know it yet. Eliza was quiet for a moment. Then she picked up her boot and began lacing it back. You know, she said, not looking up. I ran from Tennessee because I thought I'd have to do this alone. You don't, Samuel said. I'm starting to see that. She pulled the lace tight. It's taking some getting used to. Maria, who had been standing by the stove through all of this without saying a word, set a cup of coffee in front of Eliza with the firm authority of a woman who had decided the conversation was over and what everyone needed now was coffee. Drink that, Maria said. Both of you. You look like you've been rode hard and put away wet, and tomorrow's going to be worse. Nobody argued with Maria. Outside, the July heat pressed flat and relentless over the Double H. Somewhere out on the road to Redemption Creek, Philip Arden was sitting in a rented room looking at a plan that had one fatal flaw buried in it, a flaw that had been laced into a woman's boot and carried across 3 states in the lining of worn leather. And in the morning, everything was going to come to a head. Arden came back the next morning with Sheriff Cade. Samuel saw them from the barn, 2 horses coming up the road at an easy pace, no hurry in it, the kind of pace that belongs to men who think they've already won. Cade was a thick man in his 50s, with a lawman's habit of keeping his face neutral so nobody could read what he was going to do next. He'd been sheriff of Redemption Creek for 11 years. Samuel had voted for him twice. That history sat between them now like something neither of them wanted to step on. Samuel walked out to meet them before they reached the gate. He didn't open it. Samuel, Cade said with the careful tone of a man trying to keep things civil. Sheriff? Samuel looked at Arden. Mr. Arden, you're earlier than I expected. We have a court order, Arden said, and this time the smile was gone. He was done performing. He reached into his coat and produced a folded paper thicker than the one from yesterday with a wax seal on it. Signed by Judge Beaumont in San Marcos. It compels you to surrender Eliza Hart née Marsh to the custody of her lawful guardian, pending resolution of the estate claim. Samuel took the paper, read it standing there, let them watch him read it. This was signed yesterday, he said. That's correct. Judge Beaumont's in San Marcos. That's 6 hours by hard ride. Samuel looked up. You had this drawn up before you came to my gate yesterday morning. Arden said nothing. So the conversation at the gate, Samuel said, that wasn't an attempt to resolve anything. That was you establishing that I'd been notified so the court order would hold. Still nothing. All right, Samuel said. He folded the paper and held it at his side. I'll need until noon. Cade shifted. Samuel, the order says. I know what the order says, Bill. Samuel used the man's first name deliberately, 11 years, 2 votes a history. I'm not refusing it. I'm asking for 3 hours so my attorney can review it. That's a legal right. He looked at Cade steadily. Unless you're telling me a man doesn't have 3 hours to consult his attorney before complying with a civil order. Cade's jaw moved. He looked at Arden. Arden looked like he'd bitten into something sour. 3 hours, he said. We'll be at the saloon. They turned their horses and rode back toward town. Samuel stood at the gate until they were gone. Then he turned around. Eliza was standing 10 feet behind him. She'd heard everything. "Carver's not here," she said. "No. 3 hours isn't enough time for him to get here from San Antonio." "No," Samuel said. "But it's enough time for a telegraph." He rode to Redemption Creek himself fast and sent 2 telegraphs, one to Carver's office in San Antonio and one to the Federal Land Office in Austin, citing fraud in connection with a forged debt instrument and a falsified bill of sale. He used the specific language Carver had written out for him in a letter 6 months ago during the water rights dispute that had never quite resolved. He'd kept that letter because Carver's language was precise in a way Samuel's wasn't, and precision was what courts listened to. The telegraph operator, a young man named Theo, who had ink permanently on his left hand, took the messages without comment. Then he looked up at Samuel. "That second one," he said. "The one to Austin. You want me to send it priority rate?" "Yes." Theo hesitated. "Mr. Gray, I ought to tell you, a man came in this morning before you, tall fellow in a suit, asked me whether I'd received any telegraphs addressed to the Double H in the last few days." Samuel went very still. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I wasn't in the habit of discussing other people's correspondence." Theo's chin came up slightly. "He offered me $2. And I told him the rate was still no." Theo stamped the telegraph forms. "My mother grew up in Tennessee, Mr. Gray. She had a brother-in-law like the one you're describing. I know what that situation looks like." He slid the forms across the counter. "Those will be on the wire in 10 minutes. Samuel put his hand on the counter. "Thank you, Theo." "Don't thank me. Just win." He was back at the Double H, inside of 90 minutes. He found Eliza in the barn with Cutter not treating him this time, just standing beside him, with one hand on his neck, the horse's head low and easy against her shoulder. It was the kind of moment that didn't ask for interruption. Samuel stood in the doorway for a second watching and thought about what Heck had said. "You're not just protecting a woman you bought at an auction anymore." No, he wasn't. He wasn't sure exactly what he was doing, but he was sure he was going to keep doing it. "Telegraphs are sent," he said from the doorway. She didn't jump. She'd heard him coming. "How long for a response?" "Carver might wire back within the hour if he's in his office. Austin's slower." He came into the barn. "The court orders from a judge in San Marcos. Carver told me once that Beaumont's got a reputation for signing papers without reading them close, especially when there's a filing fee attached. Meaning he can be appealed. Meaning his orders have been overturned before." Samuel leaned against the stall. "It doesn't help us in the next 90 minutes. Eliza turned from the horse. "What does help us in the next 90 minutes? "You," he said. "Those papers in your boot. And the fact that Arden's bill of sale has a problem he doesn't know we found yet." She looked at him carefully. "What kind of problem?" "When I was reading it last night after you'd gone to bed, I noticed the notary seal. It's from Crittenden County. But the date on the notarization is 3 weeks before Thomas died." He let that sit for a moment. A debt instrument naming his estate as collateral, notarized 3 weeks before the estate existed. Eliza's eyes sharpened. "Thomas didn't die until November. That seal would have been—" "October," Samuel said. "Whoever forged it made an error on the date. Either they forgot when Thomas died, or they copied from another document and didn't check." He crossed his arms. "That document was signed before your husband was dead, which means it can't legally reference his estate because the estate didn't exist yet." She stared at him. "You found that," she said, "on your own." "I'm not a legal man," he said, "but I've looked at enough contracts to know when the numbers don't add up." He met her eyes. "It's enough. Combined with your discharge papers, it's enough to pull the whole claim apart." Something moved through her, something she was visibly deciding not to let become emotion in front of him, because she was not that kind of woman, yet, not with him, not after 3 days. She turned back to Cutter and put her forehead briefly against the horse's neck. Just for a second. Then she straightened. "Then let's finish it," she said. Mank. They were all in the yard when Arden and Cade rode back up at noon. Arden with his court order and his certainty, Cade with his careful neutrality, and Dodd behind them both, which Samuel had not expected. Dodd's presence changed the temperature of the situation immediately. He was there as a witness, or as pressure, or as both. He sat his horse at the back and watched with the expression of a man expecting to be paid for something he'd already done. Heck was to Samuel's left. Cole and Denny were behind at a distance, not approaching, just present, which was its own kind of statement. Maria was inside with a rifle that Samuel had given her 3 hours ago, and told her not to use unless someone came through the door uninvited. She'd said she knew how to use it. He believed her. Eliza stood beside Samuel, straight-backed hands at her sides. Arden dismounted. Cade stayed on his horse, which meant Cade was still deciding which way he'd land when this was over. 3 hours have passed, Arden said. He looked at Eliza directly. "Miss Hart, I'm asking you to come with me voluntarily. It will make this easier for everyone." Before she answers that, Samuel said, "I have some questions about your documents." Arden's eyes slid to him. "This isn't a negotiation, Mr. Gray." "No," Samuel agreed. "It's a legal proceeding, and in legal proceedings the other party gets to speak." He produced the forged bill of sale. "This document, the debt instrument naming Thomas Hart's estate as collateral. Can you explain to me why the notary seal is dated October 14th when Thomas Hart didn't die until November 2nd? Silence. It was the kind of silence that has weight to it. Arden's face didn't collapse. He was too trained for that. But something in it recalibrated fast behind the eyes. He was running the problem and finding no clean exit. "Notarial records are dated," Samuel said. "That's what makes them legal." He held up the document so Cade could see it. "Bill, you want to look at this?" Cade dismounted. He was slow about it, deliberate the way a man is deliberate when he's giving himself time to think. He took the document from Samuel, looked at it, turned it over, looked at the seal. "October 14th, he read. "Thomas Hart died November 2nd, 1881, Eliza said. Her voice was clear and carried. "I was there. I buried him." She reached down, unlaced her boot, worked the lining, and produced the folded discharge paper. "This is the estate discharge filed with Crittenden County in December of that same year. Every debt Thomas Hart owed was legally settled and closed." She held it out to Cade. "You'll notice the county court stamp is dated December 19th, 1881. 6 weeks after the death that Mr. Marsh's document claims happened before October 14th. Cade took that paper too. He looked at both of them side by side. Dodd made a sound behind everyone, not a word, just a sound, and shifted his horse back 2 steps. Nobody called attention to it, but everyone noticed. "Mr. Arden," Cade said, and his voice had a new quality in it. Flat, official. The voice he used when he'd made up his mind. "Can you explain the discrepancy in this notarization date? There may have been a clerical error." "A clerical error on a legal instrument filed for court action is fraud," Cade said. "You know that." "Now, Sheriff, I wouldn't go so far as—" "I would," Cade said. He handed both documents back to Samuel, straightened up, and looked at Arden with 11 years of lawman's patience worn thin. "Mr. Arden, I'm going to ask you to ride back to town with me and explain to me in detail how this document was prepared and who authorized it. That conversation's going to determine whether you're a witness or a suspect." Arden's composure cracked, then not dramatically, not all at once, but in the way a thing cracks under sustained pressure. He looked at Eliza. "You did this. You planned this." "I carried the truth in my boot for 2 years," she said. "That's all." Arden looked at Dodd. Dodd had moved his horse another 3 feet back. He was looking at the sky like something interesting was happening up there. "Dodd," Arden said sharply. "I just sold a woman at a market," Dodd said. "I don't know nothing about any papers." He turned his horse and walked it up the road at a pace just below a trot. Arden watched him go. Then he turned back to face Cade and the full weight of what he was standing inside. His shoulders came down slightly. Not defeat exactly, but the recognition of it. "I'll need to contact my client," he said. "You can do that from town," Cade said. "Let's ride." Cade stopped his horse at the gate on his way out and looked back at Samuel. There was something in his face that wasn't quite an apology, but was the next closest thing. "Samuel," he said, "I didn't know the papers were bad." "I know you didn't, Bill." "I should have looked harder before I came out here with him." "Yes," Samuel said. "You should have." Cade took that. He deserved to take it. "The federal office will need a statement. From her and from you. About the document being planted in your house. We'll give it. And Carver, when he gets here, he should file the fraud complaint formally. Beaumont's order gets vacated the moment he sees the notarization error. Judges won't touch a case built on a forged instrument not in this circuit." "I know." Cade looked at Eliza. "Miss Hart, I'm sorry for the trouble." Eliza looked at him evenly. "Are you sorry for the trouble, Sheriff? Or are you sorry it didn't go the way you expected?" Cade had the grace to look like that landed. "Both, I suppose," he said. And then he turned and rode after Arden. The yard was quiet after they left. Cole let out a breath that sounded like it had been held since morning. Denny sat down on the fence rail like his legs had made a decision independently. Heck walked over and stood beside Samuel and looked up the road where the dust was still settling. "That's not over," Heck said. "No," Samuel agreed. "Gerald Marsh is still in Tennessee with whatever plans he's got left." "But Arden's done." "Arden's done." Heck looked sideways at Eliza. "You carried those papers in your boot the whole time." "The whole time," she said. "Through the railroad camp." "Yes." "Through the auction." "Yes." Heck shook his head slowly. "Woman," he said with something approaching reverence, "you are something else entirely." Eliza almost smiled. It was closer than Samuel had seen her get. "Thank you, Mr. Ruiz." "Heck," he said, "you've earned it." The telegraph from Carver arrived at 4 in the afternoon, delivered by Theo himself, who rode out to the Double H on his own time. Carver's message was brief and precise, the way Carver always was. Fraud claim strong. Notarization error dispositive. Filing injunction and federal fraud complaint tonight. Beaumont order dead on arrival. Will arrive Thursday. Hold the line. Samuel read it out loud at the kitchen table. Hold the line. He looked at Eliza across the table. She had the discharge paper in front of her again, smoothed flat, like she needed to look at it to confirm it was still real. "Thursday," she said. 2 days. Gerald will know by then. He'll know Arden failed. Yes. She looked up. He'll try something else. Probably. And you're going to sit here and wait for it. Samuel said. She looked at him. We're going to sit here and wait for it, he said. That's not a correction. That's the truth of how this stands now. The kitchen was quiet. Maria was at the stove. Heck had gone back to the barn. Outside, Cutter was moving around the paddock, still favoring the leg, but less than yesterday, which was progress, which was Eliza. Mr. Gray, she said. Samuel, he said. You've been here 3 days, and you've dismantled a 2-year conspiracy using a document from your boot and plain speaking. I think we're past Mr. Gray. She looked at him for a long moment. There was something in her face that she was still deciding about, something that involved him specifically, something that was taking time and care and more courage than she'd needed for any of the rest of it. "Samuel," she said, "when this is over, when Carver's here, and the complaint is filed, and Gerald runs out of moves, what happens then?" He held her gaze. "What do you want to happen?" She was quiet. "I don't know how to want things anymore," she said. "I spent 2 years wanting to survive. I didn't get past that." "Then start small," he said. "Small like what?" He thought about it. "Small like, do you want to stay at the Double H?" She looked around the kitchen at the herbs over the window that she'd sorted, at the coffee pot on the stove, at the flour sack that now had nothing hidden behind it, at the paddock visible through the window where Cutter stood in the afternoon heat. "Yes," she said. It came out quieter than she intended, like something she hadn't fully planned to say out loud. "I want to stay." "Then you stay," Samuel said. "That's enough for now." She nodded once, looked back down at the discharge paper. And then, for just a moment, just one brief and unguarded, she pressed the tips of her fingers against it, like it was something precious, which it was. It was the last thing her husband had done for her before he died. He'd written it carefully, filed it properly, set it in place, like a man who knew he wasn't going to be around, and wanted to make sure she'd have what she needed when that happened. She'd carried it across 3 states in her boot. She'd carried him with it. Samuel watched her and didn't say anything. Some moments weren't his to speak into. That evening, as the sun dropped and the heat finally loosened its hold on the day, Denny came running from the south fence line with a look on his face that brought everyone out of wherever they were. "Ryder," Denny said, breathing hard. "Coming across the south field, not the road, the field." "Armed?" Samuel asked. "Rifle on his back, riding hard." Samuel was moving before Denny finished the sentence. Heck was right behind him. Cole came out of the bunkhouse still pulling on his jacket. The rider came through the south pasture at full gallop and pulled up in the yard in a shower of dust and spent effort. It was a young man, early 20s, face red from the ride horse heaving under him. Samuel didn't know him. But Eliza, who had come out behind Samuel, made a sharp sound that wasn't quite a word. "Robbie," she said. The young man looked at her, and some of the tension went out of him all at once, like a man who's been running toward something for a very long time and has just reached it. "Miss Eliza," he said. "I got here fast as I could." "Who is he?" Samuel asked. "Thomas's cousin's boy," she said, already moving toward the horse. "Robbie Watt. He's 17 years old. He rode from Tennessee." She grabbed the horse's bridle and looked up at Robbie. "How long?" "8 days," he said. "Miss Eliza, Gerald knows about the filing, the will. He found out the county still has the record, and he's coming himself." Robbie's voice dropped. "He left 4 days ago, with 2 men." Eliza turned to Samuel. Samuel did the math fast. 4 days from Tennessee. Hard riders. A man with enough rage to come himself instead of sending someone. "He'll be here tomorrow," Samuel said. Eliza didn't flinch. She looked at Robbie. "Did he know you left?" "No, ma'am. I left in the night." "Good boy," she said, and meant it completely. She looked at Samuel. "Gerald Marsh in person is different from Gerald Marsh through lawyers and bought men. He doesn't have a limit the same way." "I understand." "Do you—" Her voice was tight, controlled, all the things she kept controlled. "Because tomorrow isn't Arden with a forged paper. Tomorrow is a man who has never once in his life accepted that he lost." Samuel looked at her. He thought about the auction block, the note in his pocket, the document planted in his house, the mob that had come to his gate, Arden and his forged seal. All of it layered up over 3 days, all of it pointing toward this moment, toward a man who had constructed an elaborate trap and was now coming personally to see why it hadn't closed. He thought about what a man does when the complicated plan fails, and he's finally cornered and out of options. He thought about what kind of man does all this for a woman whose only offense was running away from him. "Heck," Samuel said. "Already thinking it," Heck said. "Cole." "I'm here," Cole said. Samuel looked at Eliza. "Go inside," he said. "Not because you can't handle it, because I need to know where you are when this starts." She held his gaze for a count of 3. Then she nodded, touched Robbie's arm as she passed him, and went inside. Samuel turned to face the south pasture where the dark was coming in slow and heavy across the flat Texas land. And somewhere out there on a road they couldn't see yet, Gerald Marsh was riding toward everything he thought still belonged to him. He was going to arrive at the Double H and find out how wrong he was. Nobody slept. Samuel didn't even try. He sat on the porch with a rifle across his knees and a cup of coffee that went cold sometime around midnight, and he listened to the Texas dark. Crickets. Wind moving through dry grass. The horses shifting in the paddock. Normal sounds. But underneath all of it, the particular silence of a night that knows something's coming. Heck took the south watch. Cole took the road. Denny stayed near the barn. Robbie Watt, still exhausted from 8 days of riding, had fallen asleep on the bunkhouse floor within 10 minutes of eating, which was the sleep of a boy who had done everything he could and had nothing left to run on. Samuel had covered him with a blanket and let him go. The light in the kitchen stayed on all night. At 2 in the morning, Samuel heard the back door open and close. And then Eliza was beside him on the porch with her own cup of coffee hot, which meant she'd just made it, and she sat in the other chair and didn't say anything for a while. He didn't tell her to go back inside. She wouldn't have gone. "Tell me about him," Samuel said quietly. "Gerald, what kind of man is he when he's standing in front of you?" She thought about that. "Calm," she said. "That's the thing people don't expect. They expect loud and violent. He's not. He's calm the way a man is calm when he's absolutely certain he's the most important person in the room." She wrapped both hands around her cup. Thomas used to say Gerald was born believing the world owed him something specific, and he never got over finding out it didn't. "Was he violent with you?" "Sometimes," she said. "No drama in it, just the word. But mostly he used other things. Taking away small freedoms until you couldn't remember what it felt like to move without his permission. Deciding what you ate and who you talked to, and which rooms you could use in your own house." She paused. "The finger, the one I told Arden about, that was when I told him I knew about the will. He didn't like that I knew." Samuel's hand tightened on the rifle stock. "He's coming because losing isn't something he has a way to process," she said. "Not because he loves me. He doesn't. He's coming because I'm a thing that ran away from him, and that is not a thing he can live with." "He's going to have to learn," Samuel said. She looked at him sideways in the dark. "You're very sure of yourself." "I'm sure of the situation," he said. "He's coming onto my land in the state of Texas with a fraud complaint already filed against his attorney and a federal injunction in process. Whatever he planned to do, it has to be something that doesn't look like what it is. Because if he does anything that looks like what it is, he hands us everything." She was quiet. "He's not going to ride in here with guns," Samuel said. "He's going to try to talk. He's going to try to make it seem reasonable." He looked at her. "Can you hold steady through that?" "I've been holding steady through Gerald Marsh for 2 years," she said. "I can manage one more morning." He came at dawn. 3 horses. Gerald Marsh in front. 2 men behind him hired muscle wide across the shoulders. The kind of men who were paid not to think. Gerald himself was exactly what Eliza had described: calm. He rode like a man arriving at something he'd already decided the outcome of. He was in his mid-50s, well-dressed for the road, with the kind of face that had probably been handsome 20 years ago, and now just looked expensive. He stopped at the gate. Samuel was already there. Heck to his left, Cole to his right, both of them back a few steps present, but not aggressive. Samuel had been deliberate about that. He didn't want this to look like a standoff. He wanted it to look exactly like what it was: a man standing on his own land waiting. "Mr. Gray," Gerald Marsh said. His voice was even and unhurried, like a man who'd rehearsed this. "I appreciate you being available. I'd like to speak with Eliza." "She's on my property," Samuel said, "which means she gets to decide if she wants to speak with you. She's also my legal ward. She's a widow woman with a filed will, a discharged estate, and no legal relationship to you that survived federal scrutiny." Samuel's voice was level. "Your attorney's fraud complaint was filed yesterday evening with the Federal Land Office in Austin. The court order from Judge Beaumont has been flagged for review on the basis of the forged notarization." He let that sit for one beat. "You want to ride in here and talk law, Mr. Marsh? Those are the laws we're working with today." Gerald Marsh's calm didn't break, but it adjusted, a slight tightening around the eyes, a recalculation happening behind them. He looked past Samuel toward the house. "Eliza," he called out, "I think you should hear me yourself, without a filter." "She can hear you fine from wherever she is," Samuel said. "Let her choose that." She already did. The front door of the house opened. Samuel hadn't expected that. He'd told her to stay inside, and she'd nodded, and he'd believed her. But Eliza Hart walked out of that house and across the yard and stopped beside Samuel at the gate and looked at Gerald Marsh the way she'd looked at the auction platform, straight and from somewhere untouchable. "Gerald," she said. "Eliza." His voice shifted when he said her name, something proprietary in it, something that assumed. "You look well." "I am well," she said. "That's new?" His jaw moved slightly. "I think there's been a misunderstanding about my intentions." "No, there hasn't," she said. "I understand your intentions exactly. I've always understood them. I just stopped complying with them." One of the men behind Gerald shifted his horse. Heck's eyes went to him immediately. The man went still. "You have documents that belong to the estate," Gerald said. "The discharge filing was made in error. Thomas's debts to my household were not included in the county record. I have evidence of that." "Bring it to Carver," Samuel said. "He'll be here Thursday." "I'm not interested in negotiating through lawyers." "Then you're not interested in resolving this legally," Samuel said. "Which tells me what you're interested in instead." He looked Gerald Marsh in the eye. "I want to be plain with you, sir. There is nothing on this property that belongs to you. Not a document, not an animal, not a person. You can disagree with that through the courts, and you will lose, because the federal complaint has already been filed, and the evidence is already on the wire to Austin." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't move. "Or you can make a different choice this morning, one that involves turning those horses around." Gerald looked at Eliza. And in that look was everything she'd described, the calm certainty, the absolute refusal to accept a world that didn't arrange itself around him. But underneath it, for just 1 second, something else, something that knew, that had known maybe since she'd run, that this particular battle was one he'd already lost, and had been spending a long time refusing to admit it. "You'd stay here," he said to her, "with a man you've known 4 days. 5, she said. "And yes." "That's not Gerald." She said his name and it stopped him cold. Not because she was loud, because she was completely without fear, and a man like Gerald Marsh had never once in his life had someone look at him that way. "Go home. Whatever you tell people back in Crittenden County about why I'm not coming back, tell them whatever you need to. I don't care. But I am not coming back. I was never coming back. And every court between here and Tennessee is going to confirm that in writing." She put one hand on the gatepost steady. "This is finished." The silence that followed was the kind that decides things. One of the men behind Gerald leaned forward in his saddle and said something low that Samuel couldn't hear. Gerald didn't respond to it. He was still looking at Eliza, and whatever he'd come here to find, whatever leverage, whatever crack in her he'd expected to be there, it wasn't. She'd closed it. Or maybe it had never been there the way he'd imagined it. He looked at Samuel. "This isn't over," he said, but it came out quieter than he'd intended. Smaller. It is on this property, Samuel said. Gerald Marsh turned his horse. His 2 men followed. And Samuel Gray stood at the gate of the Double H Ranch and watched them ride back up the road until the dust settled and the sound of hooves faded out into the wide Texas morning. Nobody moved for a moment. Then Cole said very quietly, "That's it. That's it." Heck said, "For now." Eliza's hand came off the gatepost. Samuel noticed it was shaking slightly, just slightly. Just the fingers, the only outward evidence of everything she'd been holding down for the last 5 minutes. He didn't point it out. He just moved half a step closer, and she didn't move away. "You did that," he said. "We did that," she said. Carver arrived Thursday, as promised, a compact, sharp-eyed man in his 60s, who reminded Samuel of a bird dog, always moving, always pointed at something, never wasting motion. He read every document at the kitchen table in 45 minutes without looking up, and then he looked up. "The notarization error alone is enough," he said. "Combined with the discharge papers and the testimony about the document being planted in your house, the fraud complaint will stick. Marsh's attorney is already facing sanctions. Beaumont revoked the order yesterday evening when Austin contacted him." He set his pen down. "Gerald Marsh has no legal claim. He never did. He was running a pressure campaign dressed up as a legal one." "Will he try again?" Eliza asked. Carver considered that. He might try to file something in Tennessee, but with the federal record established, any Tennessee court would be taking on a significant fight to override it. He looked at her directly. "You've got the will, the discharge, and now a federal fraud complaint on record. Miss Hart, legally speaking, you are the most protected woman in South Texas." Maria from the stove made a sound of deep satisfaction. "What does she need to do to make the protection permanent?" Samuel asked. Carver looked between the two of them with the professional neutrality of a man who had learned not to comment on things that weren't his business. "File a formal legal declaration of residence here in Texas. Establishes jurisdiction. After that, any claim Marsh files has to come through the Texas Circuit, which means it comes through me." He almost smiled. "I don't lose in the Texas Circuit." "File it," Samuel said. Eliza looked at him. "That's my decision." "It is," he agreed. "I'm telling you what I'd like. What do you want?" She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she looked at Carver. "File it," she said. The twist came 3 days later, and nobody had seen it coming. Robbie Watt recovered from his ride and, working around the ranch in the easy way of a young man who'd grown up doing it, came to Samuel after supper with something in his hand, a folded letter worn at the creases, the kind that had been read many times. "I should have given you this when I got here," Robbie said, "but I forgot in all the everything." He held it out. "Thomas wrote it, before he died. He gave it to my mother to keep, and she gave it to me before I rode." He looked at the floor. "It's for Miss Eliza." Samuel took it. "Did you read it?" "No, sir. My mother said it wasn't ours to read." He shifted. "She said if Eliza ever got somewhere safe, she should have it. We just didn't know where safe was going to be." Samuel found Eliza in the barn with Cutter, same place she always seemed to end up when she needed to think the horse's big, warm presence, something she'd come to rely on, the same way she'd come to rely on other things at the Double H that she hadn't planned on. He held out the letter without explaining it. She looked at his face first, then at the letter, then took it. She read it standing there. He watched her read it, and watched what it did to her face, the careful control she kept over everything, the walls she'd built. Out of 2 years of surviving the distance, she maintained between herself and the things that could break her open. He watched all of that hold, and then very quietly give way. She didn't cry the way people cried in public. It was private eyes bright, one hand pressed flat against Cutter's neck, head slightly down. The horse didn't move, just stood solid and patient the way horses did for people who needed them to. Samuel waited. After a while she looked up, and her voice was steady when she spoke, though the steadiness cost her. He knew, she said. Thomas. He knew what Gerald was. He wrote this before he died, and told me to run if it came to that. He said. She stopped, pressed her lips together, started again. He said, don't let Gerald make you small. He said you are not small. She looked down at the letter. He said find somewhere that fits you right. The barn was very quiet. Did you, Samuel asked, find somewhere that fits? She looked at him. Her eyes were still bright, but her chin was steady. I'm starting to think so, she said. Yes. He nodded once. Didn't push further. But he didn't move away either. She folded the letter carefully, the same care she gave everything that mattered, and held it against her chest for a moment. Then she looked at Cutter, then back at Samuel. He's going to be all right, she said. The horse. Another 2 weeks, and he'll carry a rider without favoring it. I know, Samuel said. You fixed him. We kept him still long enough, she said. That's what he needed, just someone to keep the world still around him for a while. Samuel looked at her. She looked back, and in the warm, quiet space of that barn, with a healed horse between them and a letter from a dead man who had loved her right pressed against her heart. Something shifted between Samuel Gray and Eliza Hart that neither of them named out loud, because naming it out loud would have made it fragile, and neither of them could afford fragile right now. But it was there, real and unhurried and built on the most solid foundation two people could build on proof of character under pressure. You didn't need to know someone for years to know them true. Sometimes 4 days and a crisis told you everything. Wick Pierce came by on a Saturday morning, 2 weeks after all of it riding easy, no urgency in him. He had a bay mare on a lead behind his horse, the one he'd mentioned, the one off her feed for 3 weeks. He stopped at the gate. Heck was nearby and called for Samuel, and Samuel came out with Eliza beside him, same as they always seemed to be moving now, not by design, but by the natural gravity of people who had gotten used to each other's presence. Pierce took his hat off. Miss Hart, he said, I was wondering if you'd still be willing to look at my mare. Eliza looked at the horse, looked at the way she was holding herself, the dullness in the eyes, the slight hollow under the ribs. She walked to the gate, opened it herself, and held out her hand to let the mare smell her. Bring her in, she said. Pierce did. He also brought it, turned out, his wife, a quiet woman named Louise, who had baked a pie and set it in a basket on her saddle, and who handed it to Samuel without ceremony when she dismounted. It's Peach, Louise said. Eliza helped my neighbor's boy last week. The fever. Word got around. Samuel looked at the pie, then at Louise. That was kind of you, ma'am. It was the right thing, Louise said simply, which was the whole of it. By afternoon, there were 2 more families in the yard. One with a sick dog, one with a question about a milk cow that had stopped producing. Eliza moved between them with the same even competence she brought to everything. No performance, no warmth. She hadn't earned just the plain, honest work of a woman who knew how to help, and did it. Samuel stood on the porch and watched. Heck came and stood beside him, and they watched together in the comfortable silence of men who'd known each other long enough not to need to fill every moment. You know. Heck said, a month ago, this yard was just a ranch yard. It still is, Samuel said. No, Heck said. It's something else now. He paused. Something better. Samuel didn't argue with that. Yeah. That evening, with the families gone and the yard quiet again, Samuel found Eliza at the paddock fence. Cutter was walking the fence line without favoring his leg. Easy fluid, the way he'd moved before whatever old injury had tightened up under the summer heat. She was watching him with the quiet satisfaction of work completed. Samuel leaned on the fence beside her. Carver filed the declaration today, he said. It's on record. Texas jurisdiction. I know. He told me. Gerald Marsh has 30 days to respond through the Texas circuit. Carver says he won't. He won't, she agreed. He knows it's done. She watched Cutter move. He just needed to hear it from me in person. That's what the ride out here was really about. He needed to hear it in my voice. She was quiet a moment. And now he has. Samuel looked at her profile, the straight line of her. The stillness she carried, the particular quality of someone who had come through a very long fire and found out what they were made of on the other side. "I want to ask you something," he said. "Ask." "The day you came here, the first night when you sorted my kitchen and made the coffee and worked on the brace for Cutter's leg. What were you thinking?" She considered that. "I was thinking, don't need anything, don't expect anything. Do useful work and be ready to leave." She paused. "That's how I'd survived the previous 2 years. Need nothing, expect nothing, stay ready." And now, she was quiet long enough that Cutter completed a full circuit of the paddock and came back to stand near the fence near her. "Now," she said, "I'm thinking about winter." He looked at her. "Whether the barn roof will hold," she said. "Whether Cutter'll be ready for work by September. Whether that south pasture needs reseeding before the cold comes." She turned and looked at Samuel directly. "I'm thinking about things that are further away than tomorrow. That's new." "It's a good new," he said. "Yes," she said. "It is." He reached out and set his hand over hers on the fence rail. Not grabbing, not pressing, just setting it there the way you set something down carefully because you don't want to break it. She looked down at his hand. Then she turned hers over and held it. They stood like that while the Texas evening came in golden and slow, and Cutter stood at the fence between them and the fading July light, and the double H settled into the particular quiet of a place where the day's work is done, and the people in it have earned their rest. Arden was formally charged with fraud 6 weeks later. Gerald Marsh settled out of the Texas circuit by withdrawing every claim, filing no response, and disappearing back into Crittenden County, like a man who had finally understood the arithmetic. Carver sent the confirmation in a letter that arrived on a Tuesday, and Samuel read it out loud at the breakfast table, and Maria said good in a tone that ended the subject completely. Robbie Watt stayed on at the Double H. He was 17, and he could ride, and he wasn't afraid of work, and Samuel offered him a position, and he took it with the seriousness of a young man who understood what he'd been given. Cutter healed clean. By September, he was carrying riders again, and the first person he carried the first time he went out under saddle without favoring easy and fluid and right was Eliza. She rode him out across the valley in the early morning, and Samuel watched her from the fence, and Heck stood beside him and didn't say a word, which was its own kind of eloquence. She came back in at a canter, pulled up near the fence, looked down at Samuel from the saddle. "He's good," she said. "He is." Samuel agreed. She swung down, landed easy, and handed Samuel the reins. Her eyes were bright. Not the careful brightness of held-back grief. The other kind. The kind that meant something was growing where something had been cut down. "I want to talk to you about next spring," she said. "What about it?" "The south pasture. If we reseed in October, we can carry 12 more head by April. That's worth doing." She crossed her arms. "Also, I think you need a proper medical area in the barn. Half this county's been bringing animals to me in a paddock. If we build it right, you can charge for it. It's a service." Samuel looked at her. "You're planning the ranch." "I'm planning a ranch," she said. "Whether it's mine to plan is up to you." He took the reins in one hand and looked at her with everything he hadn't said in 4 months, every morning of watching her work, every evening of her voice across the supper table, every careful, unhurried thing that had been building itself between them without asking permission. "It's yours to plan," he said. "Everything on this property is." She looked at him for a long moment, measuring the way she'd measured him that first day at the auction, deciding what kind of man he was. Except this time, she already knew. This time, she was deciding something else entirely. "That's a large thing to say," she said. "I know it," he said. "I mean it." Eliza Hart had run 2,000 miles from a man who had made her small, carried her truth in the sole of her boot, stood straight on an auction block in the July heat, and rebuilt herself from nothing in 5 days in a stranger's house. She had fixed a horse that 3 vets couldn't face down lawyers and sheriffs, and the man who had broken her finger and looked Gerald Marsh in the eye at her own gate and told him to go home. She was not a woman who did things she didn't mean. "All right then," she said. And she smiled, not almost, not close, not adjacent. She smiled full and real and completely without armor. "Then let's build something worth keeping." Samuel Gray looked at Eliza Hart in the September morning light of the Double H Ranch. The woman who had arrived with nothing but a worn boot and a piece of paper and more spine than anyone he'd ever known, and understood with the simple certainty of a man who had finally stopped running from the thing he wanted most that she was exactly that, something worth keeping. And the Double H, which had been just a ranch, and then something more than a ranch, became on that morning what it would be from that day forward. The place where 2 people who had been through enough fire to know the real thing when they found it, chose each other plain and clear and without conditions. That was how it began. And that was how it stayed.